HOA Karen blocked my son's insulin. She didn't know I'm the hospital pharmacy director. Why would anyone intentionally interfere with a child's life-saving medication? That was the question echoing in my mind the moment I found my son unconscious on our living room floor, sweating, shaking, barely breathing, and realized his emergency insulin delivery had never arrived. We live in a nice neighborhood, the kind with neatly trimmed lawns and decorative street lamps, and an HOA president who seems to think she's running a military base. Her name is Linda Harper, but everyone around here just calls her the Flower Karen, because every year, she fines people hundreds for planting non-regulation roses. I've always kept my distance, knowing better than to engage. But this time, she crossed a line no one should ever dare approach. It started 3 days before my son Liam's birthday. He's 13, a bright, funny kid who's been living with type 1 diabetes since he was 6. We're careful. I work as the pharmacy director at St. Mary's Hospital, so I make sure Liam always has exactly what he needs. That Monday morning, I had a special insulin delivery scheduled for overnight drop-off, a new brand we'd been testing at the hospital with excellent results. It had to stay cold, and it was meant to be delivered to our porch by 6 a.m. At 7:10, I stepped outside and found nothing but a shattered cold pack and a sticky note taped to the door. Package improperly stored. Removed by HOA for non-compliance. Contact Linda. I froze. I knew that box had Liam's new insulin pens, delicate, temperature-sensitive, and irreplaceable without weeks of paperwork. I called Liam's school, told them to send him to the nurse immediately. Then I marched down the street toward the HOA office shack, which Linda had remodeled from an old gardening shed. When I got there, Linda stood outside sipping tea like a monarch guarding her gate. "Good morning, Dr. Monroe," she said, lips curled. "If you're here about that illegal package, where is it?" I snapped. She blinked. "Excuse me? The package, the insulin, my son's medication. Where did you put it?" Linda shrugged like I'd asked about the weather. "That box was sweating all over your porch. I thought it might be hazardous. You know, HOA regulations clearly state that medical deliveries must be signed for and not left unattended. I filed it as a safety concern." I stared at her, stunned. "You threw out life-saving medication for a child because it made your porch look messy?" She rolled her eyes. "You pharmacists always act like the world revolves around you. I'll remind you, sir, this neighborhood has rules, and if I made an exception for you, everyone else would be leaving their syringes out in the open." That moment burned into me. I wanted to yell. I wanted to shove her smug smile into the gravel. But I didn't. I turned around, clenched my fists, and sprinted back home. When I got there, Liam was already on the floor, clutching his stomach. His blood sugar had tanked without warning. We called 911. He was lucky to stabilize. But what Linda didn't know, what she never thought to imagine, was that I had the entire porch under surveillance. A 4K camera hidden inside the light fixture above the door. A feed I'd installed 2 years ago after a package theft scare. And the footage? It was damning. There she was, in her ridiculous floral blouse and wide-brim hat, tiptoeing up to our porch at 6:08 a.m., reading the shipping label, sneering, then ripping open the box, inspecting the contents, and marching off with it like she'd discovered contraband. Not even a moment of hesitation, like she'd planned it. I downloaded the video, clipped the most incriminating 20 seconds, and texted it to a close friend, Detective Maria Lopez, someone I'd worked with before on a counterfeit drug case. I didn't expect her to respond immediately, but less than 20 minutes later, she called me back. "You're telling me she confiscated medication under the guise of HOA rules?" "Yes," I said, "and endangered a child." She sighed. "I'm coming over." When Maria arrived, she brought her badge and a grim face. She also brought something else, a printout from the State Health Board. It turned out that this wasn't Linda Harper's first time interfering with medical deliveries. She'd filed 6 anonymous complaints against neighborhood residents with disabilities in the past year. None stuck, but there were rumors. One neighbor's chemotherapy prescription had gone missing. Another claimed her son's asthma medication had been tampered with. That changed everything. Maria took my footage and drafted an emergency order. Within hours, officers were knocking at Linda's door. But Karen, being Karen, didn't go quietly. When she opened the door, she gasped. "What is the meaning of this? You're under investigation for obstruction of medical treatment and tampering with personal property," Maria said calmly. Linda laughed. "Oh, please. This is ridiculous. I run a neighborhood, not a hospital. I was protecting the community." She tried to slam the door, but one officer wedged his boot in before it could shut. That's when the screaming began. She was dragged out moments later, clutching a garden gnome and yelling that she was being persecuted by medical tyrants. The entire block came out to watch. Some neighbors jeered. Others just filmed. One elderly man clapped slowly. And as she was escorted into the police car, Maria turned to me and whispered, "I've never seen someone so certain they were above the law." But it wasn't over yet. Because the footage didn't just show her taking the box. It showed her opening it, handling the insulin without gloves, and placing it on a hot metal bench in direct sunlight where it sat for hours before she came back to toss it into the HOA storage bin. The insulin had been cooked. It wasn't just stolen, it had been rendered unusable by her hands. And here's the twist that hit me in the gut. When the local news picked up the story because yes, it went viral, someone anonymously leaked another video. From inside the HOA meeting room. Hidden phone footage. It showed Linda, just days before the incident, saying, "That boy always gets special treatment. His dad thinks he's smarter than everyone just because he works at the hospital. Maybe if they followed the rules like the rest of us, I wouldn't have to intervene." She planned it. It wasn't a mistake, it was revenge. Jealousy. Ego. Control. She endangered a child on purpose. The fallout was immediate. By the end of that week, Linda Harper's name was everywhere: local news, social media exposés, neighborhood Facebook groups. A clip of her shouting, "He's not special just because he's diabetic," at the officers became a meme. The public didn't just turn on her, they were furious. Parents of chronically ill children shared their own horror stories. Advocacy groups weighed in. Even a regional diabetes foundation publicly condemned her actions. But nothing compared to the HOA meeting held the following Monday. Normally, those meetings were dry affairs: 10 people, a PowerPoint, and a stale bowl of mints. But this time, over 60 residents showed up, many standing in the back. I attended not as the hospital pharmacy director, but as a father. A father whose son almost died because a woman wanted to make a point. The room buzzed with tension. The HOA's vice president, Marcia, stepped up to the microphone. Her voice shook slightly as she read from a prepared statement. "In light of recent events, we've called an emergency vote to remove Linda Harper from her position as HOA president, effective immediately." Linda wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. She was out on bail. And her attorney had already gone on record blaming me for escalating a minor neighborhood misunderstanding. But the vote was unanimous. People stood up to speak after. A mother whose child used a feeding tube. A man recovering from surgery who said Linda had once refused to allow his nurse to park on the street. Her pattern of behavior became painfully clear for years. She had targeted those with vulnerabilities, masking it under the guise of enforcing rules. I sat quietly, watching, listening. Then someone tapped my shoulder. It was a boy, maybe 15, thin, shy eyes. He handed me a folded piece of paper. "My mom said I should give this to you. Linda took my meds once too, but we didn't have proof. I'm glad you did." I opened the note. Inside was a drawing of a superhero with a stethoscope cape holding insulin pens like weapons. It said, "Thank you for saving kids like me." I nearly lost it. But just when I thought things had reached their peak, another twist emerged, one I didn't expect at all. 2 days later, I received a call from an elderly woman named Helen. She introduced herself as Linda's estranged aunt. "I know I shouldn't be calling," she said, voice brittle with age and guilt. "But I thought you should know. This isn't the first time Linda's done something like this. When her sister was sick, she refused to let her keep oxygen tanks in the house. Said it ruined the ambience." I was speechless. "She has this obsession with control," Helen whispered. "Everything has to be her way, even people's lives." I think she truly believes she's helping when she's hurting. That call haunted me, not because it justified what Linda had done nothing could, but because it made something painfully clear. Some monsters wear garden gloves. They don't growl or prowl in the dark. They sip tea on front porches. They smile in HOA meetings, and they say they're just trying to keep the neighborhood beautiful, while they destroy lives quietly, one rule at a time. Still, justice had to take its course. Maria filed a full report to the district attorney's office. With the video evidence, the medical records, and the testimony from Liam's doctor, Linda was charged with reckless endangerment, tampering with medical devices, and obstruction of emergency medical delivery. 3 felony counts. Her lawyer tried to paint it as a misunderstanding by an overzealous volunteer. The judge didn't buy it. At the hearing, I spoke briefly. I didn't talk about the rules. I talked about Liam, about the fear of finding your child's body still warm, but slipping away, about the anger that doesn't leave your chest even after the ambulance lights fade, about how the people who wear badges of authority in neighborhoods, HOA, school boards, even block captains can wield real power. And when they use that power for petty revenge, it's not harmless. It's deadly. Linda didn't look at me during the hearing, but I looked at her, not with hate, with sorrow, because some people dig their own graves, convinced they're planting gardens. When the judge finally spoke, his words were firm. You mistook authority for superiority. You weaponized community rules against those who needed care. And you nearly killed a child to satisfy your ego. Linda was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, with an additional 3 years probation. She was banned from serving on any neighborhood board or committee. Her reputation, once queen of the HOA, lay in ruins. Her husband filed for divorce. Her children refused to speak to her. Even her beloved rose bushes were dug at the order of the new HOA board, as a symbolic gesture of cleansing. As for Liam, he's okay. We're careful. We triple-check deliveries now. And he's gotten stronger in a strange way. He knows that what happened to him wasn't his fault. And he knows that sometimes standing up to injustice doesn't look like a protest signal, it looks like a porch camera and a dad who won't back down. So to anyone watching this, especially those dealing with people who misuse their authority to push you down and stay silent, document, report, stand your ground. Because you never know who's watching. And sometimes the villain's downfall starts with a single recorded truth. Do you think Linda deserved a second chance, or did her punishment fit the crime? Share your thoughts. The weeks after Linda's sentencing felt quieter. Not just because her voice was gone from the HOA newsletter, or because her signature shrill whistle no longer echoed during her daily compliance patrols. It was something deep, a collective exhale. Like the neighborhood itself was recovering from a long illness it hadn't realized it had. For the first time in years, people started talking to each other again. The invisible wall of fear Linda had constructed, built out of fines, warnings, and gossip, crumbled. Front doors stayed open longer. Children played past 6 p.m. without someone scolding them for noise ordinance violations. And neighbors who had once exchanged only wary nods now lingered by their mailboxes, swapping stories. But even in that quiet, I couldn't shake one thought. How many people like Linda are out there still hiding behind policies and procedures to mask cruelty? I began compiling everything I'd learned, not just about Linda's behavior, but the systemic issues that had allowed her to flourish. There were no checks, no oversight, and no clear lines between neighborhood order and personal vendetta. I pitched the idea to a few health equity advocates I knew through my hospital work. They were shocked at how easily non-medical individuals could interfere with deliveries that had life and death consequences. That's when an idea took root, a grassroots initiative to protect vulnerable patients from HOA interference. We called it Right to Meds. It started small. A digital toolkit to help families advocate for protected delivery zones on their property, form letters to send to HOA boards, and state-level language residents could use to demand changes in neighborhood policies. But the story gave it legs. And soon, parents from across the country were reaching out, sharing eerily similar encounters. My neighbor threatened to report my son's seizure meds as suspicious substances. Our HOA made us move our medical fridge into the garage. My daughter's formula spoiled. Someone stole my chemo pills from my porch and called it community policing. It was more widespread than I ever imagined. Meanwhile, back home, a small side story was unfolding that caught me by surprise. A young woman named Erica who had recently moved into the neighborhood showed up at my door one evening holding a pie and an envelope. "I know this is random," she said nervously, "but I just found this while unpacking. I thought you should see it." Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter from Linda, dated nearly 6 months before the incident with Liam. It was never mailed. Erica had found it tucked inside a rulebook at the house she bought from one of Linda's old friends who had moved away. The letter read, "Sometimes I think I'm doing too much, but then I remember what happened to Mom. She let things slide, and everything fell apart. I promised I wouldn't make the same mistake. If that means people hate me, so be it. At least I kept the rules. The rules don't betray you." I stood frozen for a moment. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't remorse. But it was a glimpse, a crack in the armor. It didn't excuse what she did not even close, but it reminded me of something important. Most villains don't believe they're villains. They think they're the last line of defense. That without them, the world collapses. Still, even misplaced conviction doesn't absolve you of consequences. Especially when a child's life is the price. The Right to Meds project gained momentum faster than we expected. Within 6 months, we were invited to present our findings at a state legislature hearing. I brought Liam with me. He stood at the microphone, hands shaking slightly, but his voice was clear. "My name is Liam Monroe. I'm 13. I didn't do anything wrong. But someone thought her rules were more important than my life. That shouldn't happen to anyone else." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. After that, the state passed the Essential Medical Access Act, a bill mandating that HOA boards and property managers cannot interfere with deliveries of prescribed medication or punish residents for visible medical storage, provided it's safe and contained. It even established a new penalty class for tampering with medical equipment on private property. Linda's name wasn't in the bill, but her shadow loomed over every clause. At the hospital, colleagues started calling it Liam's Law. Back in our neighborhood, life moved on. Sort of. There were still petty disagreements, trash cans left out too long, lawns a bit too wild, but there was also a new awareness. People had seen what could happen when one person's hunger for control overrides community compassion. The new HOA president was a retired nurse named Paul. He sent out an email on his first day. "This neighborhood doesn't need another enforcer. It needs a listener. If you've got a problem, knock on my door before you write a complaint. Let's be neighbors before we're officers." Simple words, but they mattered. And as for Linda, she served her sentence quietly. No visitors. No letters to the board begging reinstatement. But one morning, about 8 months after her release, I found a plain white envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a single card. "You're a better father than I ever understood. I'm sorry for the harm I caused your son. L." No signature. Just that letter. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some stories don't end with revenge or redemption. Some just end. But what matters is what begins after. And in our case, it was a movement. A lesson. A neighborhood reborn. Liam's 14th birthday came and went quietly this year. No emergency deliveries. No sirens. Just cake, family, and laughter. At one point, he looked up and said, "Do you think people like Miss Linda can really change?" I paused, thought about it. Then I said, "Maybe, but it's not our job to fix them. It's our job to protect people from them." What would you have done if it was your child? Do people like Linda deserve a path to redemption, or should certain lines never be crossed? Let's talk in the comments below. 6 months later, something happened that brought everything full circle. It was a normal Saturday morning. Liam was riding his bike down the cul-de-sac, and I was tending the small vegetable patch we'd planted together, his idea after we'd spent weeks talking about healthier meals and healing, both body and soul. The neighborhood felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. Kids laughing, a neighbor strumming his guitar on the porch, someone grilling a little too early in the day. Then a car pulled into the street. A dark blue sedan, windows tinted, unfamiliar plates. I wouldn't have thought twice except the car rolled to a stop right in front of my house. The door opened slowly, and Linda stepped out. She looked different, smaller somehow. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No more dramatic hats or HOA pins. She wore plain slacks, a cardigan, and carried nothing but a manila envelope. My heart dropped. I wasn't angry. I wasn't scared. Just confused. She walked up the driveway slowly, then stopped halfway. She didn't look me in the eyes at first, just nodded, like she was waiting for permission to speak. "I know I don't deserve your time," she began softly. "I just wanted to hand this to you, and then I'll leave." She extended the envelope toward me. I didn't take a step forward. "What is it?" I asked. "Closure," she whispered. I hesitated. Then I took it. Linda gave one last glance toward the street where Liam had stopped biking and now stood watching. She gave him a half nod, almost like a silent apology. Then she got back in her car and drove away. Slowly. No dramatic escape. Just gone. I opened the envelope inside. Contained two things. A written, notarized confession, every detail of what happened the morning she took Liam's insulin. She acknowledged the intent, the awareness of the risk, and her state of mind. A check. Every cent she had left. According to the note, just over $2,000. The memo line read, "For Liam's future." I stood there for a long while, staring at it. I never cashed that check. Instead, we framed it, tucked it behind a photo of Liam giving his speech at the state legislature. It hangs in our hallway now, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that some scars don't need to be erased to be meaningful, that some lessons have to cost something to be remembered. That night, I told Liam about Linda's visit. He didn't say much, just nodded. "I don't hate her anymore," he said, "but I don't forgive her either." "That's okay," I said. "Forgiveness isn't owed. It's earned. And sometimes, it never comes." He thought about that. Then he smiled. "But I'm glad she knows she lost." We both laughed. It wasn't bitter. It was just honest. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. And Linda, for all her manipulation, control, and damage, had finally faced it, maybe too late, but better than never. Not everyone gets that far. As our story spread through interviews, podcasts, advocacy groups, it became something more than just a cautionary tale. It became a conversation starter. Not about just HOA abuse or chronic illness, but about power. And what happens when we let small people hold big authority without checks, without compassion, without anyone willing to say, "That's enough." One evening at a community health panel, I was asked, "If you could go back and change anything, make sure the package wasn't taken. Spare Liam that trauma, would you?" I paused for a long time. Then I answered, "Of course. I'd protect my son from pain if I could. But I can't change the past. What I can do is make sure it means something, that it helps someone else's kid, that it wakes people up." The audience clapped, but one man didn't. He raised his hand and said, "My HOA president reminds me of her. But now I know what to do." That was worth more than any applause. In the end, Karen didn't win. She tried to weaponize rules. She tried to assert control over something she didn't understand. She believed order mattered more than empathy. But when faced with truth, evidence, and the community finally standing together, she fell. And in her fall, she reminded us all, justice isn't about punishment. It's about prevention. It's about the next child whose delivery gets delayed, the next family shamed for being different, the next Karen who thinks silence equals permission. We've made a pact in this neighborhood now, to look out for each other, to speak up, to never again let one person's bitterness override another's well-being. And Liam? He's thriving, stronger, wiser. He still jokes that he's HOA famous, and sometimes signs his drawings with a superhero name, Insulin Man. We framed his first one, the same one that kid gave me at the HOA meeting, and hung it above our front door. Every day when we leave for school or work or life, we walk under it, because it reminds us where we've been. And how far we'll go to protect what matters. What would you have done in my place? Do you believe some people truly change, or are some lines unforgivable? Let's talk in the comments. Your voice matters.